The geopolitical earthquake. What if Canada and the UK rewrote the global order? If you are watching the news unfolding from London at this moment, you might want to take a seat. Because what we are witnessing could fundamentally reshape the world order as we have known it for nearly a century. This is not a breaking news report about events that have definitively happened, but rather a strategic analysis of a very real possibility that geopolitical experts have been quietly discussing for months. What you are about to explore is a thought experiment based on actual political tensions, genuine diplomatic strains, and the very real consequences of America's shifting foreign policy approach. Imagine for a moment that the entire structure of Western alliance has just been torn in two. Imagine the United States of America finding itself positioned on what could become the incorrect side of that fracture. For close to 100 years, American presidents from both parties have operated under one single, unquestionable certainty. They held the belief that regardless of the chaos erupting globally, no matter how severe the circumstances became, they possessed what diplomats have always called the special relationship. They possessed the United Kingdom as their most reliable partner. London has historically served as the cornerstone of American reach into Europe. London acted as the bridgehead for American ideas, American military power, and American economic influence. Through decades of war and peace, through conservative governments and liberal ones, through Brexit and beyond, that partnership held. But what if that foundation is now cracking? What if the current administration in Washington wagered its complete international strategy on a premise that no longer holds true? This analysis explores a hypothetical scenario where diplomatic tensions reach their logical conclusion. We will examine how the United Kingdom might realistically respond to sustained pressure from Washington, how Canada could emerge as an unexpected diplomatic power broker, and what this would mean for ordinary citizens on both sides of the Atlantic. This is not a prediction of inevitable events, but rather a serious examination of where current trajectories could lead if left unchecked. To grasp the full scale of what could potentially occur, we must first examine what the current US administration has been asking of its traditional allies and why some nations are quietly reaching their breaking point. For an extended period, the America First approach has functioned under a particular philosophy about international relations. The thinking goes that putting America first necessarily means everyone else must ultimately submit to American interests. This administration has imposed significant tariffs on European products, including those from the United Kingdom. It has withdrawn from multilateral agreements that previous administrations spent decades constructing. It has demanded that allies increase defense spending to specific levels while simultaneously questioning the very alliance structures that have guaranteed European security since 1945. When the United Kingdom requested certain exceptions to American trade policies, reports suggest the administration insisted on terms that many in London found difficult to accept. These reportedly included requests that the UK reduce its food safety standards to align with American agricultural practices, that it grant American pharmaceutical companies greater access to its National Health Service, and that it openly support Washington's trade disputes with other nations, including Canada. The unspoken message from Washington, according to diplomatic observers, was clear. You departed from the European Union. You need American support more than America needs you. You have no realistic alternative destination for your trade and security requirements. This is the classic leverage play in international diplomacy, and it has worked for powerful nations throughout history. But here is where our thought experiment becomes genuinely interesting. What if the current administration overlooked something crucial? What if the individual currently occupying the Prime Minister's position in Ottawa represents a different kind of political figure than Washington is accustomed to dealing with? Mark Carney is not a conventional political figure by any standard. Before entering electoral politics, he built a career that spanned the highest levels of international finance and central banking. He does not communicate primarily through social media platforms or campaign rallies. He does not appear to lead based on personal pride or political grievance. For the purposes of our analysis, let us consider how a leader like Carney might approach a diplomatic crisis. He operates through logical structures and the kind of profound institutional connections that take decades to cultivate. Prior to becoming Canada's leader, he served as the governor of the Bank of England during one of the most turbulent periods in that institution's history. His comprehension of the British financial and monetary framework is genuinely world-class. He maintains connections among the British establishment that cross party lines. He is acquainted with the financiers who move capital through the City of London. He has relationships with the permanent government officials who actually administer the British state. He invested years in London navigating the British economy through the disorder of Brexit and the pandemic. He enjoys a level of credibility there that few foreign politicians ever achieve. Now imagine a scenario where Washington delivers what London perceives as an unacceptable final demand regarding trade and security arrangements. In this hypothetical, Carney does not issue a formal statement condemning American pressure. He does not call a press conference. Instead, he makes a series of private telephone calls to individuals he has known for decades. He presents an alternative vision. This alternative would not be merely a bilateral arrangement between Canada and the United Kingdom. That would be insufficient to replace the scale of the American relationship. Instead, in our thought experiment, Carney examines the remaining pieces of the former British Empire, the modern Commonwealth of Nations, and recognizes something that others have overlooked. Here is a factual basis for our analysis. The Commonwealth of Nations actually exists. It comprises 56 independent member states, most of which share historical connections to the United Kingdom. Collectively, these nations represent approximately 2.7 billion people. Their combined economic output is genuinely projected by organizations like the Commonwealth Secretariat to approach $20 trillion by the end of this decade. For many years, the Commonwealth functioned primarily as a ceremonial association. Leaders gathered for summits every 2 years. They posed for photographs. They issued communiques about shared values and historical connections. But the organization lacked the kind of institutional heft that drives real economic integration or security cooperation. What if a leader with Carney's background looked at the structure and saw something else? What if he recognized that the Commonwealth possesses natural advantages that could be activated with the right framework? The member states share a common language for business and governance purposes. They share legal systems largely based on English common law. They share educational connections and professional accreditation systems that make labor mobility easier than between completely unrelated nations. In our hypothetical scenario, Carney develops a comprehensive vision for a connected economic and defensive coalition built on Commonwealth foundations. This would involve eliminating tariffs on trade in key sectors between willing members. It would mean coordinating the supply chains for essential minerals and resources that the global economy increasingly requires. It would require harmonizing banking regulations between major financial centers like London and Toronto. And crucially, it would involve establishing joint frameworks for protection and intelligence sharing that could potentially operate independently of existing structures. Now add the most provocative element of our thought experiment. What if the United Kingdom formally decided to enter such an arrangement? What if the British government concluded that the costs of exclusive reliance on the American relationship now outweigh the benefits? Let us examine the resource dimensions of this hypothetical scenario, because this is where the analysis moves from abstract diplomacy to concrete economic reality. The United States depends significantly on imported essential minerals to produce everything from consumer electronics to military aircraft. Many of these materials come from Commonwealth nations. Canada possesses vast deposits of lithium, nickel, and cobalt that are crucial for the transition to electric vehicles and renewable energy storage. Australia is one of the planet's leading producers of lithium and rare earth elements essential for sophisticated electronics and defense systems. The United Kingdom itself has significant reserves of tungsten and other specialty materials. In our hypothetical scenario, what if Canada and Australia agreed to provide preferential export access exclusively to Commonwealth partners? What if they constructed a self-contained supply network for the technologies of the future? This would not be a violation of any existing trade agreements. Nations are generally free to prioritize their exports however they choose, subject to whatever treaties they have signed. The implications for American industry would be significant. If an American manufacturing business requires Canadian lithium or Australian rare earth elements under this hypothetical arrangement, they would potentially face higher costs and longer wait times compared to Commonwealth competitors. American companies would be placed at the end of the queue behind businesses from the UK, Canada, Australia, and other participating Commonwealth nations. This is the kind of structural economic shift that does not happen overnight, but can reshape industrial competitiveness over a period of years. Washington has initiated trade discussions with various partners. In our analysis, those partners might be quietly developing their own alternatives. Now we must address the aspect that would cause the greatest concern within American national security establishments if this hypothetical scenario were to unfold. The Five Eyes intelligence alliance actually exists. It comprises the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. It represents the most secretive and capable signals intelligence network in the world, with roots stretching back to the Second World War. In our thought experiment, a new Commonwealth arrangement might incorporate provisions for independent data sharing and analysis among the non-American members. This would not necessarily mean breaking the Five Eyes partnership entirely. Such a rupture would harm everyone involved. But it could mean establishing parallel capabilities for certain types of intelligence cooperation that exclude the United States. Why would trusted allies consider such a step? The public record shows that classified information has been handled in ways that concern traditional partners in recent years. Intelligence sources have reportedly been compromised. Sensitive information has been shared in ways that surprised allied governments. Career intelligence professionals in London, Ottawa, and Canberra have privately expressed concerns about the reliability of Washington as a partner for the most sensitive secrets. If the countries that fought alongside American forces on the beaches of Normandy and in the mountains of Afghanistan began to question whether the current leadership in Washington could be trusted with their surveillance data, that would represent a fundamental shift in the security architecture of the Western world. This is not a small matter. It goes to the heart of what the alliance has meant for generations. Let us consider the military dimension of our hypothetical scenario. American forces maintain significant presence at Royal Air Force facilities in the United Kingdom. These installations host American aircraft and personnel. They have been central to American power projection into Europe, the Middle East, and beyond for decades. If Washington were seriously concerned about losing British cooperation in other areas, one might expect threats to withdraw these forces as leverage. The calculation would be straightforward. The British population values the American security guarantee. The British government would be frightened of losing American defense cooperation. Therefore, threatening to remove American military assets should bring London back into line. But what if the British response in our hypothetical scenario was different than expected? What if British officials quietly informed Washington that if American forces wished to depart, arrangements could be made to facilitate that departure? This would represent an extraordinary shift in the bilateral relationship. The reason such a response might be possible is that other Commonwealth nations are developing their own military capabilities. Canada has been investing in defense manufacturing. Australia is expanding its naval presence. Together with British forces, these nations might determine that they can provide for their own collective defense without the same level of American participation that has characterized the post-war era. This would not mean that American security guarantees became worthless overnight. It would mean that the unique leverage Washington has traditionally held over its allies might be eroding. The alliance would become more transactional and less based on dependency. Now we must examine the technology sector, because this is where much of the actual economic future will be determined. In our hypothetical scenario, the London-Ottawa Accords might include provisions for something like Project Northern Light, a major independent artificial intelligence infrastructure initiative. The strategic thinking behind such an initiative would be straightforward. Information and data processing capability have become the essential resources of the modern economy, just as oil was essential in the 20th century. Nations that control their own data infrastructure and artificial intelligence development maintain sovereignty over their digital future. Nations that rely on American technology companies for these capabilities are ultimately dependent on decisions made in Silicon Valley and Washington. If Commonwealth nations determined that permitting American technology firms to manage their critical data infrastructure represented a fundamental risk to their national independence, they might take steps to develop alternatives. This could mean prohibiting American technology companies from competing for essential government contracts across the Commonwealth. It could mean building indigenous artificial intelligence systems trained on Commonwealth data and housed on servers located exclusively within Commonwealth jurisdictions. The impact on American technology companies would be substantial. The Commonwealth represents a market of billions of consumers and some of the world's most advanced economies. Losing preferential access to these markets would affect revenues and research capabilities. Technology executives would certainly communicate their concerns to Washington if such developments appeared likely. Let us examine the financial implications of our hypothetical scenario, because this is where the analysis connects to the daily lives of ordinary citizens. The City of London stands as Europe's preeminent financial center. Toronto represents a major banking force within the Americas. These two financial ecosystems are already deeply interconnected through shared institutions and personnel. If Canada and the United Kingdom harmonize their regulatory systems more thoroughly, they could potentially create a transatlantic financial corridor that reduces reliance on New York-based settlement systems. This could mean developing frameworks where Commonwealth countries conduct trade, settle financial obligations, and issue bonds without necessarily involving the US dollar at every step. The US dollar has served as the world's primary reserve currency since 1945. This status confers enormous benefits on the United States. It means the United States can borrow more cheaply than other nations. It means American companies face lower currency risk when trading internationally. It means Washington can use access to the dollar-based financial system as a tool of foreign policy, restricting adversaries from participating in global commerce. If a significant portion of the global economy developed mechanisms to conduct commerce with reduced dollar dependence, that would represent a gradual erosion of American financial power. This would not happen quickly. Currency systems have enormous inertia, but over a period of years, the cumulative effect could be substantial. In our hypothetical scenario, the immediate market reaction would likely reflect these concerns. The British pound might strengthen against the dollar on expectations of reduced American influence. The Canadian dollar might appreciate similarly. American equity markets might decline as investors reassess the prospects for companies with significant exposure to Commonwealth markets. Let us consider the human dimension of our hypothetical scenario by examining how different leaders might approach the same situation. This is not about endorsing one approach over another, but about understanding how style affects outcomes in international diplomacy. Earlier this year at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Mark Carney delivered an address about global fragmentation. He spoke about the end of the post-Cold War order and the emergence of a multipolar world. He suggested that middle powers like Canada would need to be more proactive in shaping their own futures rather than simply following larger partners. The speech was well received by the international audience present. The response from Washington, according to public reports, was dismissive. The president reportedly posted on social media suggesting that Carney was weak and threatening trade retaliation against Canada. This is a particular style of diplomacy. It assumes that projecting strength through public confrontation will bring opponents to heel. Now imagine a scenario where that approach fails to produce the desired result. In our hypothetical, Carney proceeds with his Commonwealth initiative without public confrontation, without leaked threats, without dramatic press conferences. He travels to London quietly. He works through established channels. He builds consensus patiently. He treats his British counterparts as equals rather than subordinates. When the arrangement is finally announced, Washington is caught by surprise. The president's instinct might be to respond with anger, to demand retaliation, to threaten seizure of British assets or other dramatic measures. But what actual leverage remains? Tariffs against the UK would harm American financial institutions with London exposure. Tariffs against Canada would raise costs for American consumers and farmers. The threats that worked when dealing with weaker partners might not work when dealing with coordinated middle powers. This is the situation our hypothetical scenario presents. A leader who invested years in building relationships and understanding institutional structures outmaneuvers a leader who invested those same years in tearing down connections and alienating traditional partners. Now we must address the most important question in any geopolitical analysis. What would developments like these mean for ordinary people going about their daily lives? Why should someone in Ohio or Michigan or Pennsylvania care about diplomatic maneuvering between Ottawa and London? If the United States found itself excluded from a major new trade alliance comprising billions of consumers and some of the world's most advanced economies, American goods would face competitive disadvantages in those markets. Manufacturing facilities that depend on exporting components to the UK or importing raw materials from Canada would see their profit margins squeezed. This could eventually mean slower hiring, reduced hours, or, in the worst case, job losses. If Commonwealth nations began conducting more of their trade using currencies other than the US dollar, global demand for dollars would gradually decrease. All else being equal, reduced demand for a currency puts downward pressure on its value. When the dollar declines against other major currencies, the price of imported goods rises for American consumers. This affects everything from electronics to clothing to food products that compete with imports. The cost of electronic devices would likely increase over time as supply chains reconfigure. Vehicle prices would be affected because modern automobile manufacturing relies on deeply integrated North American supply networks. Energy costs could become more volatile if the integrated North American energy grid becomes less coordinated and Canada prioritizes its new Commonwealth partners over American customers. These are not immediate effects that would appear overnight. They're gradual structural shifts that unfold over years. But they're the kinds of shifts that affect the economic opportunities available to ordinary families. They represent the real-world consequences of diplomatic choices made in Washington and elsewhere. Let us step back and consider the broader historical context of our analysis. For much of the period since 1945, a particular assumption has guided American foreign policy. The assumption was that the United States represented the indispensable nation. Whatever chaos occurred in Washington, whatever mistakes American leaders made, the world fundamentally required American military power and American consumer markets to function. The United States was the central actor, and every other nation was essentially orbiting around it. This assumption had significant elements of truth during certain historical periods. American military commitments did guarantee security for allies in Europe and Asia. American consumer demand did drive global economic growth. The dollar-based financial system did provide stability that benefited everyone who participated in it. But assumptions that hold true for decades can eventually become outdated. Economic power shifts. New centers of growth emerge. Allies who were once dependent develop their own capabilities and their own interests. The question that serious analysts debate is whether American policy has adapted to these changes, or whether it continues to operate based on assumptions that no longer fully apply. In our hypothetical scenario, a coalition of middle powers demonstrates that coordinated action can create alternatives to American-centered structures. They demonstrate that competence, stability, and mutual respect can sometimes accomplish more than threats and ultimatums. This does not mean the United States becomes irrelevant. It means the world becomes genuinely multipolar in ways that require different diplomatic approaches than those that worked in the past. If our hypothetical scenario were to unfold, other nations would certainly be watching closely. Australia maintains its own complex relationship with both the United States and its regional neighbors. India has historically valued its independence in foreign policy while maintaining connections with multiple major powers. The nations of the Pacific and Africa have their own calculations about which partnerships serve their interests. A successful Commonwealth initiative would demonstrate that alternatives to American-centered structures are viable. It would show that middle-sized economies can cooperate effectively without requiring American leadership at every step. This demonstration effect could encourage other regional groupings to pursue similar integration. The sequence would not be dramatic. There would be no single moment of rupture. Instead, there would be gradual diversification of partnerships, gradual development of alternative institutions, gradual reduction of exclusive reliance on American guarantees. Over time, the network of relationships that has defined the post-war order would become more complex and multipolar. This represents change, not collapse. The United States would remain a major power with enormous economic and military capabilities. But it would operate in a world where it must compete for influence rather than simply assuming loyalty. This is a different kind of international environment than American policymakers have historically faced. Let us consider how Washington might realistically respond if developments like those in our hypothetical scenario began to occur. The instinct in any administration would be to push back, to demonstrate that such initiatives carry costs, to remind allies of what they stand to lose by distancing themselves from the United States. The challenge is that traditional tools of pressure might be less effective than they once were. Tariffs against the UK would harm American financial institutions. Tariffs against Canada would raise costs for American consumers and farmers. Withdrawing military commitments would reduce American influence without necessarily harming allies who are developing alternatives. Every action Washington might take carries potential costs. Every threat issued could backfire if allies call the bluff. Every round of retaliation could accelerate the very diversification that Washington hopes to prevent. The situation is what strategists call a losing game. Once the underlying relationship has shifted, using leverage often destroys whatever remains of the partnership. This is the dilemma our hypothetical scenario presents. A president who built a political identity around winning, around never backing down, around always projecting strength, finds himself in a situation where traditional displays of strength are counterproductive. The options are to accept outcomes that look like defeat or to take actions that make the situation worse. Neither choice is attractive. If you wish to understand where global affairs are heading, if you desire to comprehend the forces reshaping international relationships, you need to look beyond the headlines and the official statements. You need to examine the structural factors that drive nations toward cooperation or conflict regardless of who happens to be in office at any particular moment. The mainstream media will necessarily focus on the immediate news cycle. They will report what officials say at press conferences. They will repeat the talking points that various governments want circulated. This is the nature of daily journalism. But understanding the deeper currents requires sustained attention to the underlying factors. The questions our analysis raises are genuine ones that scholars and policymakers debate continuously. Is the special relationship between the United States and United Kingdom evolving or eroding? Are traditional alliance structures adapting to changing circumstances or failing to adapt? Can middle powers effectively coordinate to protect their interests in a world of great power competition? These are not questions with simple answers. Reasonable people can disagree about the trends and their implications. What matters is that citizens engage with these questions seriously rather than accepting comforting narratives that may not reflect reality. We have explored a hypothetical scenario in which the United Kingdom and Canada, together with other Commonwealth partners, develop an alternative to exclusive reliance on the United States for trade, security, and technology cooperation. We have examined the factors that might drive such a development and the implications it would have for ordinary citizens. This scenario is not a prediction. It is an analytical tool for understanding the forces at work in contemporary international relations. The tensions we have discussed are real, even if the specific outcomes remain uncertain. The pressures on traditional alliances are genuine, even if their ultimate resolution is unknown. What we can say with confidence is that the global landscape is changing. The assumptions that guided policy for decades require re-examination. New powers are emerging. Old alliances are being tested. The world our children inherit will not be identical to the world we grew up in. Staying informed, thinking critically about international affairs, and engaging with complex questions rather than simple answers is the responsibility of citizens in a democratic society. The decisions made in Washington, London, Ottawa, and other capitals will affect all of us. Understanding those decisions requires sustained attention and careful analysis. Thank you for engaging with this extended thought experiment. If you found it valuable, please consider sharing it with others who might benefit from a deeper exploration of these issues. Comments and respectful disagreement are welcome below. The global conversation about our shared future is one we all participate in, whether we recognize it or not.